So now we're on Daf Chavtes Amud Beis, and now Reish Lakish seems to be offering a Havamina that if another Kohen Hedjo didn't complete the Shechita that was begun by the Kohen Gadol, there's a Havamina that the karma would be possible, which means that there's a Havamina that you need to complete the Shechita. It's not enough to do Rov. Well, if you need to complete the Shechita, then how could you assign the completion of the Shechita over to a non-Kohen Gadol, to a Kohen Hedjo? Im kein havi le'avoda bi'achar v'tanya kol avodas Yom HaKippur me'en ksheris ela bo. So it must be that all you need is rov sima. That's clear, because otherwise we would apply the principle of kol havodas Yom HaKippur eno kosher ela bo. So how could you let the Kohen Hedjot complete the shechita? You need that part of the shechita. It must be that you don't need the entire shechita. So therefore, the Gemara is asking, why does that Mishnah have to teach me that Rov Shechita is enough? It has to be enough, because otherwise, how would you give the balance of the Rov Shechita, the Gemara Shechita, Lamari, to a Kohen Hedjot? And we have a principle called Avodas and Ksheres Elvo. So Gemara says, you know what? Let's analyze Reish Lakish in the following way. This is what Reish Lakish has in mind. Yachol yehi pasul b'Rabbanan. We might think that the Rabbanan said that you have to complete the Shechita, even though the Torah would say that it's enough to do Rov, and on a Rabbanan level, you need the whole Shechita. And you might think that if you didn't finish the Shechita, then the Rabbanan would passel the Korban. Because again, since the Rabbanan require Gemar Shechita, if he didn't do Gemar Shechita, it's possible b'Rabbanan l'kach. Therefore, the Mishnah wants to tell us Rov Echad be for Rov Shnai Be'Beima, that even l'chatchila it's a kosher shechita. Now wait a second. If l'chatchila all you need, even on a Rabbanan level, is to shecht Rov, why bother with giving over the rest and the Gemara Marika to a Kohen Hedjot? Mitzvah l'marek. Now, why exactly is there a mitzvah l'marek? This again has nothing to do with the validity of the shechita. The shechita clearly is valid with rov. So if shechita is valid with rov, and the Kohen Gadol did the rov, it's already geshachted. It's already the avodas hashchita is complete. Why bother? So the Gemara answers that there's a mitzvah l'marek, that we want to complete the shechita. Very strange. It means there are two dimensions to shechita. There's the shechita hamachsheres, and then there's a mitzvah of shechita. Now we get to another dimension of this sugya, which is machlokas of Shimon ben Lakish and Levi Saba. According to Levi Saba, ein l'shchita ela basof. The shchita is only valid at the end. Of Yochanan Amar, yesh l'shchita b'tchila v'etzof. According to Rabbi Yochanan, the shchita carries a validity from the beginning to the end. You can't skip the beginning. But Levi Saba says, what do you mean? Who cares about the beginning? The shchita is basof. That's when he accomplishes the rov simon, and the shchita is ksheira. Okay, now, at this point, the Gemara is going to analyze the scope and the application of this machlokas. Amar Rava, hakol mod. Heichad is shachat simon echad ovi kochav, v'simon echad Yisrael, shehi psula, sharei nasa b'maisa treifa b'yad ovi kochav. So if the guy shechted one of the two simonim, the animal is now a treifa, and that's it. The fact that the Yisrael picked up where the akum left off and shechted the other simon is irrelevant. He's shechting a treifa. Again, I was wondering, what about Tumah V'Tara? Okay. Next. Bi'olas ha'of nami. Right? What do we say is unique about Olas Ha'of? It requires Malika for both Simon. Heiche de Molak, Simon Echad. Oh. So now forget about Akum. Now we're talking about the Chut HaSikra, right? The Chut HaSikra was this red belt that divided was around the middle of the Mizbeach. And with regard to Chatas Ha'of, the Hazoyas Adam is done Lamato. With regard to Olas Ha'of, it's done Lamala Min HaSikra. So he has to climb up, to the top half of the Mizbeach before he does the Malika, and then he does the Hazoyos on the top half. What happened here? And again, Olas Ha'of needs Malika for two Simonim. Heiche de Molak Simon Ech Lamata, he blew it. And he imitated a Chatas Ha'of, and he did the Malika Lamata. Finally, he caught himself. He realized, hey, I better get back on the track. And he successfully did Malik on the second Simon Lamala. Psula. Now, at first glance, since Levi Saba was of the opinion that Ein L'Shchita El Basof, well, the Sof was the second Simon. And, in fact, the second Simon was Nimlak, Kihul Chaso, on the top half of the Mizbeach. So why is it Psula? So the answer is, says Rav Asharei, Osaba Maisa Chatas Ha'of Lemata. Since he did Malika on the first Simon, Lamata, imitating a Chatas Ha'of instead of an Olas Ha'of, that itself is sufficient to invalidate the Ola. Even if I hold Ein L'Shchita Ela Basof. So unfortunately, this particular Gemara that I have did not offer much of an explanation. But I think it has to do with the area of Kodshim called Akira, where you could change the designation of a karma. But in any event, whatever it is, the bottom line is he imitated a Chatas Ha'of on the first Siman, and it's almost as if he converted an Olas Ha'of into a Chatas Ha'of, so therefore the Olas Ha'of is Psul. So now Rava wants to tell us, after excluding this, what is then the Stei Akrav? Where are they arguing about? Lo nechleku el kagon. Now we have a discussion about shchutei chutz, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just say, did I jump the gun too fast? 1 second. Yeah, shchutei chutz. When you imitate the avodas hakorban outside the migdash, you're chayv kares, and we discussed this at great length in Zvachim. So what happened here? Kigon sheshachat simon echad bachutz, which l'chora should generate a chiyuv of shchutei chutz with a chiyuv kares, but simon echad b'fnim. Then he went inside the azara and he shechted the second simon in the proper place. So now, if we integrate the first simon to the second simon, then the first simon was actually part of the shchita of the carbon. And if you have a shchita of a carbon that requires obviously avoda in the azar, but he did it in chutz, he's chayav kares. According to Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to integrate the whole shchita, and the first part of the shchita was done by chutz. And mechayev, therefore he's chayav for shchutei chutz. Lemandi Omar, according to the other Mandi Omar, that's Levi Saba, that Ein L'Shchita El B'Sof Lo Mechayev. Why? Because the entire thrust of the shchita is, the emphasis is on the sof, and the sof was done inside. What he did outside is not even relevant to us. It doesn't register on the Richter scale to generate a chiyuv of shchutei chutz. And the Gemara rejects. Amalei Rabba Bar Shimi. Marlo Omar Hochi, Umanu Rav Yosef. My master Rav Yosef did not say it in this way. Because what did my master say? Heicha de shochat simon echad bachutz, v'simon echad bifnim, nami posel shrei osa maisa chatas of bachutz. Brilliant. Why are you focused on Olas Ha'of and only on Olas Ha'of and saying that since Olas Ha'of needs the second Simon, and according to Levi Saba, Ein L'Shchita L'Besof, therefore the Shchita of the first Simon outside the Mikdash is meaningless. Forget it. I can come up with any scenario of an Avodah B'fnim that if it's imitated Bachutz, it generates a Chiyuv Kares. And we have the Avodah of the Chatas Ha'of. And in the case of the Chatas Ha'of, all you need is one Simon. So even according to Levi Saba, everything depends upon the one Simon. And if he shechted the one Simon Bachutz, he's Chayiv Kares. So the bottom line is, this is not a successful suggestion of the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Levi Saba. Lo nechlaku elo kigon sheshochat miut simonim bachutz. Now, miut simonim would not be a valid avodah b'fnim for anything. You always need rov. But if I'm going to apply the principle of yesh l'shchita mitchilavad sof, and we integrate the beginning, which was miut simonim, and he did it bachutz. Had he done it bifnim, it would be part of the shchita of the avodas hakorban. Is lamandi omar yesh l'shchita v'sof according to Rabbi Yochanan mechayev, mandi omar l'shchita v'sof lo mechayev. Okay, so we finally have a case of a machlokas, but Masiv Reb Zera doesn't understand Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Because we're going to learn a Mishnah in Para in the fourth parak of Masechta Para. Now, the halacha of Para is very strange, as Shlomo Melech pointed it out. It's just counterintuitive. Any Kohen that's involved in the avoda, and there are many, many different avodas for preparing the Para, is considered, the Torah says he's Tommy. And that's called in the language of the Mishnah in Para, called Asukim B'Para, Mitchil V'Ad from the beginning of the avodas HaPara, is Tomei U'Mitamim Begodim. Right? Not only is he Tomei, but any Begodim that he's wearing, including his cap, is Tomei. Uposlim Osa B'Malacha Acheres. Okay, what's Malacha Acheres? So this is based on a pasuk. V'saraf es hapara, and it should have said usrafa. So we derive the Sifri that Visaraf means he's involved in one avodah. But if the Kohen is involved at the same time with two avodos, what would be the example? I forgot for a second. What was the case while he was shechting? Oh, here's a case. Okay, I can't find it now. These are very long footnotes here, take up half the page, but I saw it before. Anyway, he gets involved in some other malacha, and therefore it passes the Parah. Okay. But that's not the part of the Mishnah that occupies our mind. Iraba psul b'shchitasa. Now, the halacha is that when do we say that the Kohen who is involved in any of the aspects of the service of the paraduma becomes Tameh? That's only if at the end of the day the service was validated. But if it was possible b'shchita, then bein kodem psula bein liachar psula ena mitami begadim. So with regard to shchita, if he shechted it b'psul, the entire avoda of the paraduma goes down the tubes, and therefore the halacha of tumas begadim doesn't apply. No one's tummy. However, ba'azah, if let's say there was some sort of psul in the hazah, right? Because after you prepare the paraduma, you have to do hazah. You have to sprinkle the blood of the par 7 times towards the Oel Moed, right? That's after the Shkita. Then the halacha is kodem psula mitame begadim. If he was doing one of the avodos, like for example Shkita, before they mess up in the Hazah, which came later, then mitam begadim. But liachar psula and mitam begadim, because once the Hazah was not done properly, then the entire endeavor goes down the tubes. The Iamrit Yeshno Shchita B'Tchilavat Sof. If you can say Rabbi Yochanan, that Shchita is from the beginning to Liflog Nami B'Shchita. Why do you make this distinction in the case of Hazoya? Forget about Hazoya. What about Shchita? Irva Psul B'Shchita, Kodem Psula Mitam V'Godim, Leachar Psulaina Mitam V'Godim. Right? If you're going with the Shchita Mitchilavat Sof, so then even though the psul and shchita happened later, but nevertheless, we might want to say that that liachar psula einam etam beganim. Just 1 second. One second. I had this liachar psula. We're almost there. Just this one line of the Gemara eludes me. I think what the Gemara has in mind here, but again, this is just in a general sense, the Gemara is saying that, let's say the beginning of the Shechita was done properly and the end of the Shechita was improper. Like, for example, maybe he did the first semen properly, not the second semen. So then we should say that whether or not the Kohen should be Matam V'Gorim should depend on what moment in time, because if it was after the finishing of the Shechita, which was done improperly, invalidly, then by that time the paradum is invalid, and therefore it should not be Matam V'Gorim. But if the Kohen was wearing begadim at the time of the beginning of the Shechita, and even though he messes up the shechita subsequently, but we're holding now like Rabbi Yochanan Yeshna B'Tchila B'Yatsof, so even at that moment in time when he began the shechita, and he did a good shechita at the very beginning, that should be considered a valid shechita, and therefore it would not be mitam v'god. And that's what the Gemara says: Liachar psula eina mitam v'god, but kodem psula mitam v'god. Omar Rava niskalkala shchita ka'amrit. You're asking about a question where he messed up the shchita. Shani hasim digloy milsum afreid delav shchita klal. So apparently the Gemara until this point in Rava didn't understand that the psul of shchita now is going lemafreya. Therefore, if you hold the Yeshlut Chil of itself, the Gemara in the Havmina before Rava thought that at the very beginning of the shchita, that's a valid shchita, and therefore wouldn't be b'tami b'godim, which is called in the Gemara's language kodim psul b'tam b'godim. And now Rava says no, that's not a right argument because once the shchita is possible at the end, then he gloy milsam afreya that the shchita was garnished, it was worthless. Omar Rava kasha, but I have a kasha dafka on Levi Saba. Why? Let's analyze the Mishnah in Peah in the light of Levi Shita Liflog Bechshera de Para. Right? Why do you have to, distinguish between Kodem Psula and Liachar Psula with regard to Hazah? You can make that distinction even with regard to Shchita. Why? Kigon, for example, the Shchaktua betray Gavri, right? Two men slaughtered the Paraduma. We're now assuming that that is acceptable. The Gavra Kama Lo Mitama, the Gavra Basra Mitama. According to Levi, who holds that Ein L'Shchita El Basof, then at the beginning of the Shchita, meaning the first person who started the Shchita, he should be tar. Omar Rav Yosef, Trey Gav B'chad Zivcha Kamet, forget it, Bar Minoau, drop it. There's no such thing as two men who are involved in the Shchita. This Nino, because we had the Brisa before, that Tizbach Shalo Yushnaim Sholtim Zevach Echet, Tizbachu Shalo Yeh Echet Shochet Shnei Zvachit. Yom Rav Kahana Tipusku Ksiv. It's all based on, Yeshem L'Mesoris. So it's impossible to make this distinction and introduce a case where two people are slaughtering one paraduma. There ain't no such thing. Amalei Abaye still wants to reject and object to Levi. So he says to Rav Yosef, Lavit Marla, didn't we have a brisa in this context? Omar Rabba Baruch Rabbi Yochanan. No, I'm sorry, regarding this brisa. Zu Divrei Rabbi Lozer Rav Shimon. Stima. Aval Chachamim Omrim Shnaim Shoftim Zevach Echad. They never accepted this whole prohibition inhibiting us against two people slaughtering the same sacrifice. Therefore, according to the Yesh Omrim, the Chachamim Omrim, they would say that you could distinguish between the two people in terms of whether there's Tumas Begodim, and the first guy should not be Mitamitus, the second guy should, based on Levi's principle of Ein L'Shchita El Basof. And Abaye wants to take it even one step further. Reb Shimon Nami Liflog. Kigo de Shochat Chad Gavra B'Shnei Sudarin. Oh, wow. There was only one person shechting, according to Reb Elazar, but he switched his hats in the middle. So he wore one hat at the beginning of the Shechita, and then he ripped it off and he put on another. The Sudar Kamalo Mitamin, right? Because according to Levi and L'Shchita El Basov, so we don't consider the beginning of the Shechita, which would now be Mitami his Begodim, and therefore his first Sudar is Tahar, the Sudar Basra, but his second Sudar became Tameh, because that's when the Shechita was registered. And we don't find this distinction in the Tana, and that's the kasha that we should ask. Elabib Psula de Parakamayri and Bechshera Lo Kamayri. The Mishnah in Para is not talking about the person himself, but rather it's kind of focused on the Psula de Para, on the Psul of the Para. That's the subject and the concern of the Mishnah. And if that be the case, the Mishnah in Para has nothing to do with Rabbi Yochanan and Levi Saba. So here's what we got up to on Daf Lamed Masiv Rav Idi Bar Ovin. It's Hashem. Early tomorrow we'll pick that up. So I wish you a great day. Thank you so much.